to a level not seen in generations. Our country is in a clean energy arms race with China and other powers. But unfortunately, these policies from Donald Trump and Republicans may prevent us from winning that arms race with China. That's because the Trump administration is talking about selling out to special interests and far-right ideologues that want to nuke the provisions of the IRA that help us promote clean energy. They want to keep in place the oil and gas subsidies that have been around for more than a generation, but eliminate the incentives that put us in the lead on clean energy. From what I've read, that's how the nominee sees it as well. That would be a recipe for higher energy costs, weaker energy security, and surrender to China when it comes to clean energy jobs and investment. In my view, that just defies common sense. I'll close with this. Many people, myself included, hoped that the president-elect would pick a steady hand for Treasury Secretary, someone who would be a moderating force, who'd work with all sides, and especially for the interests of all Americans, for a tax code that gives everybody in America the chance to get ahead, not just the people at the top. So this is an important discussion today, and I wish I had read something that would indicate that this nominee would be the kind of Treasury Secretary I described. That's why we have the hearing, to get his views. Thank you, Senator Crapo.
Thank you very much, Senator Wyden. And today, we are honored to have our good friend and colleague, and now the new Budget Committee Chairman, Senator Lindsey Graham, to help introduce the nominee. Welcome, Senator Graham, from the great state of South Carolina. I want to thank you for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you to introduce Mr. Bessent.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and ranking member to all my colleagues, and there are only 100 of us. We know each other pretty well. This is my first appearance in the Finance Committee, probably last. Y'all work on complicated stuff, and I'm glad you like this stuff. Seems kind of boring to me, but it's important what you do, and I respect the intellect of the people on this committee because our economy needs the best minds that we can find on the Finance Committee. And we need a Secretary of Treasury that knows what he's doing, has the trust of the President, and loves his country. Your ship came in with this guy. So Scott Bessette's from South Carolina. He's academically gifted and real-world tested. He went to Yale, so nobody's perfect. When he told me that, I said, I don't know about that. But anyway, he's really, really smart, and this is a complicated area. Now, why am I here? Because Trump won. I wouldn't be here if Trump hadn't won. Trump won because more people voted for him. And he had to pick people to form his cabinet. And when he talked about the Secretary of Treasury, I'm not the normal person you would go to ask about because this is not so much my portfolio. But when he mentioned Scott, I said, oh my God, home run from my point of view. I mean, you talk about somebody who's academically gifted, understands the world. Scott, like any Republican president, would pick Scott. I mean, he's really understands the president and what the president wants to do. And the reason I vote for almost everybody, for every president, is I believe, colleagues, that every president deserves a cabinet that they know and trust and can rely upon. If I had to vote for people based on agreeing with them, I wouldn't vote for anybody y'all picked. That's not the standard for me. I vote for people who I disagree with because I think they're qualified. So I would just ask the committee to think for a minute, is this man qualified? Does he have the background and the intelligence and the character to serve President Trump and our nation's Secretary of Treasury? I think by any reasonable test of qualifications, he excels beyond the bare minimum to the highest level of excellence. But that's just my opinion. So my goal here today is to tell you a little bit about him. You've heard from the chairman about his success in the financial world, about his academic qualifications. He was born in Little River, South Carolina. Why do they call it Little River? Because it's little, and it's a river. It's in Horry County. How many of you heard of Myrtle Beach? Most of you. Well, this is somewhere between Conway and Myrtle Beach. At 9 years old, his first job was to set up beach chairs and umbrellas in North Myrtle Beach. And apparently you did well there, because North Myrtle Beach is thriving. He went to North Myrtle Beach High School, and he was voted most likely to succeed in 1980. And we have a high school classmate of his. What did they see in him? The same thing I see. Someone who really is talented and works hard and just a good person. The type people that you think are going to succeed, but you hope succeed. So he lives in Charleston, in a really nice place. Going from Little River to Charleston is about a 2.5-hour drive, but it's a real change. Since I represent South Carolina, I like them both very much. He's married, John, his husband's right behind me. They have 2 kids, Caroline and Cole, and they're absolutely adorable. And from a South Carolina point of view, we're really proud of Scott. I was over the top happy when President Trump picked him, because I know him. I know where he came from. The rich and powerful don't live in Little River. This is truly the American dream. This man has been successful at everything he's ever tried to do. He's worked really hard. And why did President Trump pick him? Because he believes that President Trump's economic agenda is good for this country, and he wants to help President Trump be successful. And here's what Scott said. I think it's the melding of economic policy with national security. Economic policy and national security are now indispensable, and Donald Trump understands that. So I'm here to tell you, folks, I agree with that. If we don't have energy independence, we're less safe. If we don't get our debt in order, we're less safe. I am known around here as kind of a national security guy, but I do understand economic policy matters. If you want to clean up the environment, a carbon fee seems to be a good way to do it, to punish China and India for bad carbon practices. Call it a tariff, call it whatever you want to do. So President Trump won. I'm here today because he won. I'm here today because Scott lives in South Carolina. I'm here today to tell you, if you use qualifications as your test, this is the easiest vote you'll ever take. If your goal is to play like the election didn't happen, then I guess you'll vote no. That's just where we're headed in the Senate. When you lose an election, you get up and dust yourself off and you get ready for the next one. But I was honored when he asked me to introduce him, because I know this man, and America will be in good hands if he's our Secretary of Treasury. He deserves this job. He's qualified for this job. And President Trump, thank you for picking him. On behalf of all of us in South Carolina, we're extremely proud of you, and we wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Graham. We appreciate you giving this introduction, and you are now excused, as is our practice. And Mr. Bessent, before we turn it over to you for your opening statement, I have 4 questions that we ask all nominees who come before this committee. The first is there anything that you are aware of in your background that might present a conflict of interest with the duties of the office to which you have been nominated?
No, sir.
Second, do you know of any reason, personal or otherwise, that would in any way prevent you from fully and honorably discharging the responsibilities of the office to which you've been nominated?
No, sir.
Third, Do you agree without reservation to respond to any reasonable summons to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of the Congress if you are confirmed?
Yes, sir.
And finally, do you commit to provide a prompt response in writing to any question addressed to you by any senator on this committee?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Again, welcome to the committee, Mr. Bessent, and you may make your opening statement.
Good. Thank you. Chairman Crapo, Ranking Member Wyden, members of the Finance Committee. It's an honor and a privilege to be considered by this committee as the President's nominee for the Secretary of the Treasury. I want to thank all of you who took the time to meet with me over the past few weeks. I want to thank my spouse, John Freeman, who is here today, and my wonderful children, Cole and Caroline,
Mike, I'm not sure if his mic's working.
who are sitting behind me.
Mr. Bessent, could you pull the microphone a little closer to you?
Who are sitting behind me for the ultimate civics lesson. I want to acknowledge 3 people who couldn't be here today. My 98-year-old mother-in-law, Celine Freeman, a World War II French war bride of an American soldier who lives with us in Charleston, South Carolina, making for a 3-generation household. My sister, Paige McLeod Bessent, who doesn't like crowds and prefers the mountains of South Carolina to large cities, and my recently deceased sister, Wynn Bessent, who worked tirelessly as a public defender in one of South Carolina's poorest counties. I also want to thank President Donald Trump for having placed his trust and confidence in me for such an important role in his administration. While I've met with many of you, most Americans watching at home will be unfamiliar with my background. I have been blessed with a fulfilling and successful career, but my presence here today was far from predetermined. I was born and raised in the South Carolina Lowcountry. My father fell into extreme financial difficulty when I was young. When I was 9 years old, I started working 2 summer jobs, and I haven't stopped working since. I eventually made my way to Yale. I accepted my first internship in finance because the job came with a pull-out sofa in the office to sleep on, which allowed me to live in New York City rent-free. I've been involved in the financial markets ever since. I've been fortunate enough to work with some of the world's greatest investors in a career that has taken me to almost 60 countries over 40 years. My life has been the only in America story that I am determined to preserve for future generations. Today, I believe that President Trump has a generational opportunity to unleash a new economic golden age that will create more jobs, wealth, and prosperity for all Americans. My life's work in the private sector has given me a deep understanding of the economy and markets. And while this experience will be invaluable in crafting economic policy, I have long adhered to the principle that you should know what you don't know and lean on those who do. Having never served in government, I intend, if confirmed, to be in close contact with each of you in your offices and seek your counsel. The Treasury Department plays a critical role in protecting American national security. We must secure supply chains that are vulnerable to strategic competitors, and we must carefully deploy sanctions as part of a whole-of-government approach to address our national security requirements. And critically, we must ensure that the U.S. dollar remains the world's reserve currency. Today, Americans face significant challenges in an economy that has not created enough opportunities for working men and women. We have an affordability crisis, a housing shortage, and for the first time in my lifetime, parents feel as though the American dream is slipping away from their children. The federal government has a significant spending problem, driving deficits that have averaged an historically high 7% of GDP during the past 4 years. We must work to get our fiscal house in order and adjust federal domestic discretionary spending that has grown by an astonishing 40% over the past 4 years. Productive investment that grows the economy must be prioritized over wasteful spending that drives inflation. As we begin 2025, Americans are barreling towards an economic crisis at year end. If Congress fails to act, Americans will face the largest tax increase in history, a crushing $4 trillion tax hike. We must make permanent the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and implement new pro-growth policies to reduce the tax burden on American manufacturers, service workers, and seniors. I've already spoken with several members of the committee, as well as leaders of the House, about the best approach to achieving these important goals together. As President Trump has said, we will unleash the American economy by implementing pro-growth regulatory policies, reducing taxes, and unleashing American energy production. The breadth and depth of our capital markets, along with predictable pro-growth tax policy and smart, updated regulation, will continue to make America the most popular destination in the world for starting, growing, and taking public a business. And as we rebuild our economy, the country. I humbly thank you for your consideration and am eager to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Besant. Before I begin my questions, I want to reemphasize how appreciative I am of your diligence in the process that we've gone through vetting here in this Senate. I appreciate the more than 3,000 pages of supporting material you've provided, as well as the countless hours you and your staff have offered to respond to questions from members of this committee. Let me be clear. You followed all of the applicable law and met the committee's long-standing diligence standard. Your process matched that which has applied to nominees in every previous administration. And I want to go in my first question to you to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which Senator Wyden and I have both mentioned already, and you've mentioned in your remarks. The attack on this statute, this law, which is law, I remind everybody it is the law now, it was passed in 2017, is that it was a tax cut for the wealthy. I appreciate you, Mr. Besant, noting that it will be a $4+ trillion tax increase if we do not extend this law. And a point that I would remind all of my colleagues is that if that $4+ trillion tax increase happens, it's not just going to be something that impacts the wealthy. It is $2.6 trillion of it. The majority of it falls on people who make less $400,000 for a family with 2 taxpayers, under $400,000 per year. That's the number that President Biden chose. He wanted to protect it. $2.6 trillion of this tax cut hits those making less than $400,000. Moreover, massive amounts of it hit pass-through entities, small businesses across this country. This is not a tax cut for the wealthy that we're talking about. It is a tax increase on all Americans, the majority of whom are in the lower and middle income categories. My question to you is, one of our pivotal tasks is to make sure that this tax increase does not happen. Can you give us your perspective on the impact that would occur in this country if we allowed this $4 trillion tax increase to happen?
Senator Crapo, thank you for this, and thank you for the meetings over the past few weeks. I've enjoyed working with your staff And this is the single most important economic issue of the day. This is pass-fail. That if we do not fix these tax cuts, if we do not renew and extend, then we will be facing an economic calamity. And as always, with financial instability, that falls on the middle and working class people. We will see a gigantic middle class tax increase. We will see the child tax credit halved. We will see the deductions halved. So it will be what we call in economics, it has the potential for a sudden stop. And as I said, traditionally with these sudden stops, it falls on working Americans.
Thank you. And I would just say to you, you may be aware of this, but the Tax Foundation has indicated that if we do sustain these tax cuts and protect them from expiring and stop this tax increase, that the extension of this policy would increase the growth of the GDP in the United States by 1.1% over time. Similarly, and I don't know how they came up with the same number, but the National Association of Manufacturers indicates that if we don't extend this tax relief, that there will be a 1.1% reduction in growth of jobs and development in our economy. It seems to me that as we are talking about what to do for America, that protecting America from a 1% reduction versus a 1% growth in GDP is a critical objective. Could you just give a little bit of perspective? I know you've just answered this question in another context, but could you just give a little bit more perspective on those kinds of dynamics? And I'm sorry, I'm going to try to keep to 5 minutes, and we've only got about 15 seconds left of mine, and I want to be sure everybody else stays on time, so I will too. Could you quickly respond?
Well, Senator, I would just say that we saw the power of these tax cuts in 18, 19, and going into January of 20 before they were interrupted by COVID, and the great success that we had.
Thank you. Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me say to the nominee, I've got 4 questions that I'm going to ask, and if we both can keep it brief, I think we can get to all of them, because I think it really frames for us what the debate is all about. I'm going to start by talking about the future of direct file. This is the program that helps our people who choose it to save hundreds of dollars when they file their tax return. Last year, the IRS launched it. It was enormously popular among taxpayers, but of course, the tax software giants and their big lobby just hate it. They want to shut it down. Now, the filing season starts January 27th, so it opens in 10 days, and millions of taxpayers around the country have already been notified that they are going to be eligible to use direct file this year. So I won't do this for every question, but I'd really like a yes or no on this one. Will you commit to keeping direct file up and running if you're confirmed?
I will commit that for this tax season, that direct file will be operative, and the American taxpayers who choose to use it will. And if confirmed, I will consult and study the program and privacy.
I appreciate the answer. It means that taxpayers are going to save, who choose to use it because it's voluntary, hundreds of dollars, and we'll have a chance to see once again how popular it is with practically everybody except the tax prep software crowd. On to tariffs. Donald Trump, with no plan and no strategy, says he's going to put across-the-board tariffs, blanket tariffs on all imported goods, which means that our workers and our small businesses are going to get clobbered with additional taxes on practically everything they buy from other countries. My question here is, who would pay these tariffs? Americans or foreign countries?
So this, Senator Wyden, just to understand, so I can frame the answer correctly, do you believe that these tariffs are a consumption tax increase?
I believe these tariffs, you can call it whatever you want in terms of trying to gussy it up. They're going to be paid for by our workers and small businesses. And all through the campaign, we heard they weren't, that foreign countries were going to pay it. I think that's baloney. It's going to be paid for by workers and small businesses. So, your response.
Yes, Senator, I would respectfully disagree. And the history of tariffs and tariff theory, optimal tariff theory, does not support what you're saying. Traditionally, we see that the current, if we were to say use a number that has been thrown around in the press of 10%, then traditionally the currency appreciates by 4%. So the 10% is not passed through. Then we have various elasticities, consumer preferences may change. And finally, foreign manufacturers, especially China, which is trying to export their way out of their current economic malaise, they will continue cutting prices to maintain market share.
Okay. That's an academic view of it. But what I know is the history of this is it clobbers people of modest means. They're the people who are going to get hit. And all through the campaign, there was a big show that it was going to be paid for by foreigners, not so. Two other questions I want to get in. And I already made it clear, and you and I talked about this. I'm for a tax code that gives everybody the opportunity to get ahead. You and I talked about my friend Bill Bradley. He and I have been working for this for years. Do you believe the tax code should treat wages differently than it treats wealth?
Look, in any tax system that advantages and creates distortions, it is a change that, Senator, it is a decision that was made when the tax codes were written. And so every tax code involves the trade-offs and distortions in favor of other the gains.
It sounds to me like you do believe that it's fine to treat wealth more favorably. I couldn't disagree more. The idea that a dollar earned by a hedge fund manager has more value than a dollar earned by a teacher or a factory worker, I just think it's a disconnect with the American people. One last question, and that is about the legislation that was written in this room that was the biggest transformation on clean energy in American history. That is our package that basically said the tax code as it relates to energy is a broken down mess. And we basically said we're going to have a technology neutral system. The more you reduce carbon, the bigger your tax savings. Now there is a big effort in the Trump administration to reverse it. I think that's going to be bad for the economy, but it is going to be damn good for China because we are in an arms race on clean energy with them. Are you going to be on the side of people who want to unravel this?
Senator Wyden, just so we can frame this for everyone in the room, China will build 100 new coal plants this year. There is not a clean energy race. There is an energy race. China will build 10 nuclear plants this year. That is not solar. I am in favor of more nuclear plants. And I would note that the IRA, as scored by the CBO, is wildly out of control in terms of spending on the upside.
Well, first of all, the clean energy package does protect nuclear because members on both sides of the aisle in this room wanted it to be that way. But if you're going to talk about fossils, the United States has achieved a greater level of energy security than we've had in generations. Oil and gas production is at record highs. And it's not just that, but it's about clean energy. And I'm very troubled by your position denying that we're in an arms race with China on clean energy, because we definitely are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We do need to move on. And I told Senator Wyden he could have those 4 questions, but I want to remind everybody else we've got a 5-minute time limit. He deserved those extra questions. Senator Grassley.
Mr. Benseth, congratulations. I want to start out with where you and I talked about something in my office, and you remember that tongue-in-cheek comment I made to you that you're going to be asked by the chairman, will you answer all of our letters? And everybody that comes to the Hill says, yes, they're going to. And I said, maybe you better say maybe, because most people don't keep that promise. So I just wanted to remind you, if I write you a letter on my oversight responsibilities, I'd appreciate it if you'd answer it. Now to my first question. My Democrat colleagues believe, you gonna put that up? My Democrat colleagues believe the only solution to our unsustainable debt and deficit is higher tax rates on, and that ends up being on job creators and families alike. However, history proves that high tax rates fail to raise significant revenues. Taxpayers, workers, and investors are smarter than that. In other words, they're smarter than we in Congress that thinks that at one time a 93% marginal tax rate would bring in more revenue than a 70% tax rate or a 50% tax rate or a 30% tax rate or a 40% tax rate and so on. But as you can see from this chart, Congress isn't too smart because the taxpayers decide how much money they're going to bring into the federal treasury. Now, on the other side of the ledger, federal spending is at levels we've never seen outside of war and recession and still growing. So I'm making a statement to you, but if you'd like to comment on whether or not we have a fiscal imbalance primarily or a spending problem rather than a revenue problem.
Senator Grassley, I enjoyed visiting you in your office, and will remind you that when we were talking about the American agriculture, that I may be the first Treasury Secretary nominee in a long time who knows what a section is, 642 acres, and involved in the farming business. And yes, we do not have a revenue problem in the United States of America. We have a spending problem. That historically, for the past 40 or 50 years, revenues, federal government revenues, have averaged about 17 to 17.5% of GDP. And spending has been slightly over that, leading us to a 3.5% budget deficit, which is manageable because we have roughly 3.8% nominal growth, 1.8% real growth, 2%